And let's maybe start with what's really, on top of people's, um, minds at the moment. Like we're all in a situation where if you're working in the enterprise, the C-level comes and says like, guys, the holy grail is AI, and it will solve all our problems. So you'll have to use it everywhere. Stop everything else. So like, if that happens, right, and the manager is in front of you, and you actually want to do platform engineering, but now you're supposed to do AI. And Leah, like, if I can sort of give that to you, like, what do you say? Like, what's the point to make in that situation?
I think a wonderful starting point, whether you're concerned with platform engineering specific topics or AI topics, and of course those two are very interrelated, is to understand what problem you're solving in the first place. So it's great that the manager is coming with a clear and communicated stance on it's very important for us to use AI. But if we can start by understanding what problem it is we're trying to solve, that gets us halfway to the solution just there. And it's very common to find that you have two people talking about a solution or a next step, solving two or more different problems. So start with what problem are we solving?
And yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Like, you just also had a conversation with DX. You just mentioned that when we prepared this debate here. Abi Noda said a thing that really resonated with me, and that's it might just be that the advent of AI is the single biggest driver for developer experience that we've ever witnessed, because there is not going to be good utilization of AI if we don't really invest in developer experience. Like, how can you sort of help us understand what he meant by when he said that?
Well, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is it's easy for us to see the many meaningful ways that AI can help boost individual performance. And of course, there's this implicit goal, an explicit goal in a lot of cases, that we want this to accrue to great organizational impact for our customers, and impact for the business. And we have so much ability to accelerate that. What's really going to help us unlock that is understanding like how individual goals and tasks and what problems we're solving accrue to business goals. And so to the extent that we can understand where the real bottlenecks are, what the real problems are that we need to solve, we have this like tremendous opportunity to really multiply value for our customers and meaning for our developers, solving bigger, more interesting problems. That's the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and another thing that I found so interesting about that statement is, um, and I'm just returning from London, where we did a workshop on platform architecture, and the thing that really struck me is that if you want to architect a platform to be well suited to work, or like be ready for the AI era, and you want to design interfaces and structures and backend systems for platforms or whatever in an ideal way, so agents etc. can utilize them. You need to apply the exact same architectural principles that you would probably also need to apply if you're designing this for humans. I found this so crazy, right? Documentation has to be really good, because otherwise an LLM can't make use of this. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have an API, like one guy from a bank said, like, yeah, we have everything in PDFs. So how do we do this with policy checking? I think the answer is like, you don't, right? Like you had a problem before, you have a problem right now. Like, getting ready for AI, if the more I'm looking at this, means just making sure you're really hitting the basics. Otherwise, you have a problem.
Yeah, and in platform engineering, the basics often come down to what we like to call quality attributes. Sometimes you call them non-functional requirements or extra functional requirements. The things that are often properties of the system as a whole. Like you can't look at any one part of your code base or any one thing an agent does or a developer does and say that's where the reliability is or that's where the security is, the way you can look at a sign-in or a checkout feature. And so these problems are properties of the system as a whole. They're emergent and they're fundamentally tied to architecture. So when we're thinking about architecture, we can often think about how it improves a developer workflow or an agent workflow, and we should think about those things. But what problem they're solving, it becomes really powerful when we're able to figure out which aspects of security, which aspects of reliability, which aspects of performance, and so on are vital to the success of the business, and customer experiences that we're solving. And architecture really encapsulates those values and enforces those principles at scale.
Yeah,
And it can constrain them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Casper, can I pull on a thread that Leia mentioned just a few minutes ago about solving actual problems? I am jet setting all over the place. Amsterdam right now, and was just flew in from Sydney, Australia. And one of the clients that I'm working with there is doing a big modernization. So they're doing a pretty large modernization. They're a couple years into it, and it's a seven or so year effort, and they're about 1.5 years into it. And to the idea of solving actual problems, and downward pressure that you get from a C-suite. Their C-suite has come and told their developers, um, we want to deliver this modernization faster. Can you apply AI to make it faster? And they said, maybe, we don't know. How would we? What problems would we be solving? Like, how would we actually um, do those things? So they never actually started from what are the friction areas or what are the problems that the developers are actually facing in that particular effort. They just had this downward pressure from the CIO to make the modernization faster. So we did some things that were not exciting, that were recommended in the DORA report for this year. We actually did a value stream mapping, and we found out that testing was their long problem. Right, it took them, they had a 6 month testing cycle anytime they wanted to do a release. So we said, oh, let's apply some engineering foundation. You can test better, but we can also layer in AI to create test cases faster, to have a human in the loop, to kind of extract some of that toil there. And lo and behold, they were able to take that 6 month testing cycle and make it 2 months, right? It's still long, highly regulated environments, these types of things, but actually finding out what the source problems are that developers are facing is generally the starting point for some sort of AI investment. It's not just peanut butter spreading AI for AI's sake, because a lot of our C-suite executives are doing strategy by FOMO, right? They're going. I always imagine, CTOs and CIOs at some fancy bar talking about AI investments that they've made and the productivity that they've gotten while they're at the country club or in some bar, and then someone else gets super jealous, and then they go to their engineers and say AI. And so I think that it's really important to orient, like Leah said, to orient around actual problems and not just have AI for AI's sake a lot of times.
I can probably talk a bit more about that, like from the DORA perspective, and like full disclosure, like I'm complicit from helping like author the report, like, but we didn't come at this from an aim of leading some of these questions. Like the way that we go about that in terms of trying to research this is to say, hey, we know that some teams are successful, right, when they do some of these things. We saw from last year's report that some teams are successful. They've gone through that motion. Their executive has said, like, go get me some stuff. Here's X much amount of money for AI. Like, can you do it? And some teams succeeded and some teams didn't, right? So part of that research piece was to say, like, what is it? Was it the quality of the model? Was it the location of the team? Was it the size of the company, right? And so, one of the pieces there, it's a very long report, so I'm sympathetic, but like go in and look at the AI capabilities that we pulled out of that. And we've already referred to, I think, a couple of those pieces there. So one is quality internal platforms. I don't think that's a shock to anyone here necessarily. But we didn't predict that. Like that was an assessment. We asked, hey, what's the quality of your platform? What are these characteristics that you're doing at this point in time? And how did that correlate to that increased investment in AI? And so the piece that came out of that very clearly was, if you've not invested in those quality internal platforms, if you're trying to hook MCP services on, but you don't have APIs to start with, all these things will now just create problems in your ecosystems. If you don't have an AI policy, everyone's just picking and choosing, the different models and going to different places on the internet for stuff, your security team are probably going to be upset, and kind of rightly so, right? Like the AI isn't magic. You still have those same security boundaries. If you don't have good data quality, back to the PDFs, how are you getting those to the models effectively? How are you getting up-to-date data in those pieces? When it comes to shipping, like, are you shipping in large batches? Are you making like these very, very large, giant PRs that the models have decided is a really good idea, and then suddenly someone's got to review that, and they're looking at 10,000 lines of code, and they don't know the quality of that. It's very hard. Like the sort of testing piece of that then gets the bottleneck in those pieces. So the 7 things we found, and you can get more details in the report, like cover these topics. If you don't do some of those activities, you don't have these AI capabilities, you're spending money on the wrong part of your delivery flow. And that's why I think the frustration is some of the money that we're spending here may be improving individual developer productivity. And most developers came back and said, yes, my productivity is going up. I'm not. 90% of developers said, yes, I'm using these tools. Were we getting 90% of outcomes? We're not getting 90% of outcomes. And that's because through the overall development SDLC, we're seeing these bottlenecks occurring. That's where your metrics need to go. That's where you need to start measuring those bottlenecks. That's when you start thinking like, look at these capabilities and see which ones are those bottlenecks for you. Is your security team blocking you? Is your test team blocking you? What is happening in that space? And just removing those teams isn't going to make it better. Removing your security team doesn't make you secure. It just makes you blind to what's happening in that scenario. So same for all these other pieces as well.
And I think that there's one thing that I think a lot of people, in the don't really understand, also from a management perspective. Like everybody's racing, right? And like the differentiator is not that you're really good at procuring ChatGPT, right? That's not like, that's not the thing that sets you apart. You won't train your own models, so that's not something that you'll change anyway, or influence anyways. So you exactly have 2 differentiators, like what's the input to the model and what's the output, right? Like what tools is the model using? And so the input is how well do you train the humans that are using this, and are they good at, like, is that well integrated? And then the second thing is like, do you have good APIs that they can, like, and those are the differentiators. Like there's just pretty much like there's not much more, like, if you think about that. Bojan, can we like I know that you've experimented a lot, and like I don't want to go into too much detail there, but can you look at a little bit, like, from your perspective, how have you you have a certain way of approaching hype situations. Like you told me the story of how you looked at blockchain and how that will change the world, and like how are you assessing hype, and how are you making decisions how to get your engineering organization into the driver's seat and create a competitive advantage?
I mean, idea behind this question, right? If the question is, are we bullish on AI? For sure, right? Just if we have to compare it with the blockchain, NFT, Web3 kind of story from a few years ago, the big difference for me is just the amount of use cases that this technology addresses versus, in the end, what was possible back in the day with the technology and the narrow scope of the problems it was solving when we refer to blockchain back in the day. So for AI, we are extremely bullish. But in terms of what puts the engineering teams in the end on the driver's seat to create value for the company, I think, again, I can only repeat what the rest said. Foundation is a big enabler here, because building PLCs, especially with AI, is super simple, right? Everybody can put out there something to just show, hey, this somehow semi-works. Having that at scale across tens of thousands of employees or across many different markets, millions of customers, that's a bit tough, as many companies have figured out on the way. And I think apart from the actual work that has to go into the solutions and the actual end-to-end experience, actually the biggest challenge on the way is foundations. And I guess we are in a good place from that perspective, because we've invested so many years in building that. Take, I don't know, the dream to go from designs to production code, right? For web, for mobile. We spent, as many other companies as well, over a decade to build design systems. So now, and having guidelines and having, journeys. So putting that all together and having to see the first results live, that we can in the end ship, the end is much less compared to if we had to build the whole thing from scratch and figure out that we don't have any standards and everything. Every team is doing it a different way. It's approach a different, design practices across the company. That would have been super difficult. Same goes for APIs that you mentioned as well, right? Massive enabler. When you have a standard that you're doing APIs and security and everything else in a certain way, you can flip a switch and have those as MCP tools in one shot, versus going back and redoing pretty much every single API in the different technologies and the different ways to do auth. And by the way, my prediction, just to maybe sum up this monologue, auth, from what I see on the ground, would be the biggest problem for many of those solutions to really go mainstream and be scaled, just because there are just so many different ways out there right now to do that for different applications, for different integrations. Many generations are still in production. And in fact, it's just a massive pile of technical debt that never got cleaned up over the years. And now, when you want agents to access those APIs, where you have to switch switch between user and system context, where you have to do fine-grained auth as this agent is passing the results from many different systems and trying to make a decision what data should be shown where, I think this is going to be a massive challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it is, and that's maybe something, Ricky, you also look into a lot of different cases. If like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like this is the golden age of newcomers, right? Like if you are in a clean setup today, or you're starting something, right? This is your time, because it looks like there's still so much complacency in a lot of the more established organizations, and it looks like there's still not the willingness to really clean up. And it feels like now more than ever, if you don't do this, like that's the thing that always fascinated me with DORA, or like earlier the puppet reports, that you had that this wild difference between the front runners and everybody else. Like, and I was thinking, okay, like AI has the potential to actually close that gap. But I think we're actually seeing that the opposite, happening, in that, we will see this gap widen. And is that something that you're observing as well?
Yes, actually. Because of some of the things that Boyan just mentioned, that the tech estate for a lot of organizations that I'm talking to and working with, the tech estate is so, I don't want to say polluted, but let's use that word. So polluted by kind of some of these, by some technical debt, both from my data is not in the right state, or my non-functional requirements are not being met, or my security and authentication are not at the level that they need to be. That when the magic of AI comes in place, it just exposes a lot of those technical debt issues. Tugging on authentication, many of the organizations that I talk to think that MCPs in particular are just this magical thing that I've got all of these, I've got this all of this data, and the MCPs are just going to magically unlock it, and it's going to expose it correctly to the right individuals. But what generally happens is that some sort of security event happens. Why was user X able to access that data through the MCP? Well, that's not a problem with the MCP. That's a problem with the actual security of this legacy organization that's there, and not addressing that before applying MCPs or agents or any of these AI capabilities to your tech estate doesn't I mean, it certainly will make things faster, but it will also make it faster that the technical debt problems that you have are being exposed, which is why, again, it's really, really important to go back to the things that are in the DORA report and in the AI state of platform engineering around making sure that the platform is API first, is secured first. Those are the foundations that you need to have instead of that. And Casper, you're right. The people that are starting from a clean slate can architect for AI in mind, and they're just in a much better position because they're not saddled by some of the or encumbered by some of the legacy technical debt that's there. And if you're not addressing that, you're going to end up exposing those things, those issues at a much larger scale.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Leah, if I can, I know that Jameson, you have also spoken and researched a lot on how to measure impact, how to keep a watch on the pulse of how the organization is improving, and as people are embarking on the joint journey of AI and platform engineering, like what are the things, or what are the approaches that you would take, or that you're taking yourself, in order to make these things measurable? Like, I'm introducing a certain approach in pair programming or vibe coding, probably not, but like how do you think about measuring that and see whether we're optimizing in the right direction?
Well, there's certainly no one-size-fits-all solution. That's something that James and I keep saying when it comes to platform engineering, but there are some patterns that are really helpful. First, it's reasonably well understood how to measure developer workflow and developer activities, sort of the individual level. But it's also important to measure that organizational impact at a top line. So like, the overall commercial or business goal could be stated something like, our goal is to maximize value with existing resources, achieving acceptable quality and sustainable costs. Just if you were to measure kind of the top line, software goal for a business. And each of those pieces has things that you can know. It doesn't necessarily mean you need very deep metrics across all aspects of this to understand, like what your costs are, what your major quality bars are. So I think that is a really good North Star. Again, just knowing what problem we're solving, understanding the high level understanding of the commercial impact of the software that we're doing. Another pattern that can be really helpful here is how you divide up the problem space. So you have hardware resources, developer resources, software resources, and they're not all equally suited to solve all problems in the same way. So for example, if you divide up, any way you have a workflow configured, there's 3 processes at play that require different resources. You have your development or creative process, which is really like the best and highest use of human creativity and talent. And anytime we can get giving developers more time in the development process is really valuable. You have the deployment process, which is where use of hardware and software and automation and efficiency there is highly valued. But the toil that developers spend, especially people that are focused on application development versus platform engineering, might be considered waste or unnecessary overhead. And just if you look at those two types of processes, you can see how the different types of resources can be applied in different ways. So if you can systematically look at ways to take developer time that is spent in this process of deployment and give it back to that time to the development process and the creative process, that might be a higher leverage ROI than additional hiring. It might be. And you don't have to have a ton of detailed metrics up and down to just know that you're roughly improving the system and making better use of resources. And you can validate that through, user research and debriefing how processes went and just, having good platform customer interactions there. So those are two things, like the understanding the top level goal and then having a principled way of breaking down the allocation of resources to know what's a better or worse, or more valuable or less valuable use of those resources. And you can tailor that to many different scenarios. That's why there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, but this is also such a powerful thing, right? Like just the realization that focusing on high ROI time saving, I would always have the nudge. It costs you less than hiring and training, right? But the impact is so much higher, and that's really also one of those core messages, to send up the chain, that it's always better to optimize the great people you have right now in comparison to really anything else.
I saw a quick comment about measurement and looking at telemetry. And I just, that's probably a great point of clarification. So thank you. The point I'm trying to make about making a principled investment here is there are things you can know that you don't necessarily need, to block your decision making and your progress on having, a complete set of data. It could be distracting in some cases. However, telemetry, observability are fundamental for us to even identify our areas to improve overall. So like the more we can measure and put those, that telemetry to use, the more opportunities we can find to identify bottlenecks, to identify things that we can optimize, and we can't really optimize without data. So there's a balance there between knowing, A is more valuable than B for us in this case, and then really identifying that ability to accelerate. So thank you for that comment.
And one thing that I would add additive to that is a lot of times as platform engineers, when we think about telemetry and observability, we're thinking about the telemetry and observability in the production environment, but we should expand that thinking to think about telemetry within the pipeline, telemetry within the actual SDLC, things like one thing that gets overlooked is something as simple as test flakiness as a telemetry point, right? So expand our thinking of telemetry and observability to just beyond what's in the production environment to everything that is leading up to something being delivered into the production environment as well is an important additive comment to observability and telemetry.
I think just to go into that a bit further as well, like one of the pieces that I have a lot of conversations with customers about is metrics are overwhelming, right? Like there's so many different things you can measure in certainly in software and technical environments, but like just generally in businesses, there's thousands of levers that can be pulled within a typical business in order to do anything. And so typically people have this idea of like, well, just make it simple, like make the metrics so simple I can consume them and have them on a single pane of glass so I can just see everything. But that it's functionally impossible for even the smallest businesses to have a meaningful like single pane of glass, or metrics that can be consumable directly by every individual. So we have techniques, right? As humans, we've learned over the years for like how you manage that. So we compartmentalize metrics the same way that we do other things. Like let the metrics for the, and in SRE, we talk about like symptoms versus causes, right? I want to get alerted because my website is down, not because the CPU is 100%, right? I have this conversation practically weekly, right? And people are like, but I'd like to know if my CPU is 100%. You don't. Someone does, but it doesn't need to go to your executive team. They're not interested in that, right? Like that's not the dashboard they want. That's not the metric they want, right? Similarly, even the exec metrics that come up, are you looking for innovation or are you looking for cost saving? You can read a dozen books on this, and some of them will say like, yeah, you can do both. Practically, that's hard, right? It's hard to cost save and innovate at the same time. So often, your executive team is thinking, I'm putting some bets on innovation, I'm putting some efforts on cost saving, crossing those metrics, crossing the streams on those, very difficult to do in a meaningful way. When we talk about like the DORA research pieces as well, there's some things to be aware of, right? So what have we found consistently over the years? Individual productivity does not correlate to the overall outcomes, right? It's the sort of the soccer team problem. You can hire all the specialist soccer players and get all the best people in the world, putting them in a team and getting that team to effectively win tournaments, like it's hard, right? Like that's very difficult. And so, the same problem occurs with software development, same problem occurs in all of these technical environments. The team metrics are the most important metrics. Those are the ones that we see correlate with outcomes for overall organizations. And the temptation for us as managers, as leaders is, well, that's hard. Right? I'm not really sure. That team metric doesn't really tell me the granular level. Like, so I'm just going to go in and start measuring individual stuff anyway. You can do that. I'm an engineer. I'm not a cop, right? You can do that if you want. But what we're telling you is the research shows team metrics, features delivered, reliability levels attained are those metrics which help your business. So like try and use those, try and focus on those. And I think the final bit is you probably don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? When we do talk to people about this, often they're using DX or PART or DORA. Like you probably have all the metrics frameworks you need. And adding another metrics framework, I mean, you can try getting good at what you're doing today. Try and improve what you're doing today. And and I think the final piece, like just to sort of keep this one in everyone's minds, not everything can be measured, right? Like there's just some things where you look at your stack and you're like, this doesn't feel right. And you're going to have some humans in the loop just looking at things and going, this isn't quite right. And I can't tell you why, but we still need to just acknowledge that not every single thing can be measured, right? The McNamara fallacy is what that's called in this scenario. That still holds true today. The AI didn't replace that, right? It's still the same problem.
I fully agree with that. James, I think at least we see it at Sixt on the ground as well, right? You can get lost in measuring things. At certain point, once you have the core metrics which are relevant for your team, for the way you are trying to execute, for the outcomes that you're trying to deliver in your organization, the next step is also having some qualitative measurements, right? Go and ask the people, for example. They will tell you what's wrong, especially if they're on a certain mission and they're failing to achieve it. Nobody sits in an ivory tower, even from us, right? From those, how do I call us? C-level people who just put pressure down. Nobody sits and looks at metrics and be like, I think the issue is that, right? It's we need more steam. We need more commits. Rarely, right? It's a beginning of an investigation. And then you go in, and then at certain point you have to make decisions, and you will not have the full picture. If you spend the time to have the absolute full picture and all the arrows pointing in that very same direction, I find that as a opportunity cost loss at that point. Sometimes it's easier to make maybe even 3 decisions, 2 of them being wrong, that one being right. But often enough, you'll probably lead or get faster to the goal than just, figuring out how to go deeper and deeper and deeper and build all those KPI trees that hopefully at some point show you the reality of the world. World is complex. People are even more complexer. Therefore, a healthy balance is, I think, what works best in practice, at least in the world of business, I know.
Yeah, and tailoring it as well. I think there's one thing in the chat here which talks, and it's quite an interesting one about sort of the sort of MTTR type activities. This is something that a colleague of mine spent a lot of time researching, right? And I think in the community we now talk about like those being shallow metrics. So there's a number. I'll share the link for the report, but what we found is meaningfully moving your MTTR doesn't actually improve your reliability outcomes. And so, or vice versa, right? Like there's no correlation from MTTR to most people's reliability outcomes. So we can be spending a lot of money on an AI tool to improve things, but if we don't have the correct measure, like we've set our SLOs wrong or sort of some of these activities, like we're basically not able to show the results, like the ROI of what we're impacting here. So we do need to spend some time doing that. And I think that's a lesson for a lot of AI teams as well. Like, did you just get stuck at the testing stage, right? Did you actually put together a spec? Did you get your test harness? Do you know what success looks like? Or are you just sort of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping for the best? We've all got to get a little bit better at that. Like, okay, let's check what we're going to measure first. Let's make sure that metric exists. And like, let's do some basic research, I think, on those pieces as well to see what's working and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. We have also interesting point here from Clark. I find that starting with something as simple as time to information is a helpful KPI. How long is it taking for people in the organization to find information? That is, yeah, and then all of these things really speak to those fundamentals. Leah, what are your feelings on this?
Oh yeah, I think this is a great comment. It's it shows like if you just go back and look at what are some of our like enduring challenges in development, and especially development on the cloud. It's like, what resources do I use? How do I safely and effectively combine them? And how do I estimate cost? I've been trying to solve those problems since 2012. Getting better information, more quickly to the right person is just a fantastic principle. I think actually in the DORA report, this thinking in systems theme continues to come up. It comes up in software engineering discussions we were having around, the importance of design as a core skill. And one of the tenets of systems design and systems thinking is that, or the insights, I think it came from Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. It's like most of what goes wrong in a system goes wrong because of late, missing, or inaccurate or incomplete information. And if you can give a system more timely, more correct, more complete information, you can fix it with surprising ease. And I mean, that's like very much in line with Clark's point. So plus one.
Yeah, and then again holds true for humans, and it holds true for agents, right? Like if the agents don't have the context, they'll have a hard time doing anything. So I think that's reiterating this point of if you I think this is such a great message, right? Because in whatever this trend is going, like whether we're all farmers in 10 years or not remains to be seen, but the general strategy is optimized so it's amazing for humans to use, like really treat the platform as a product that is really, really delightful for humans finally, right? And by doing this, in whatever scenario AI develops, you're absolutely fine because you're also developing for AI. That's a very, very powerful message, I think. There's a thing that we've all spoken a lot about in the last years, and that's shifting down and abstractions, and how much should you abstract, and make sure that you don't take away the freedom. And if you think about this from a again in an AI world, it's also and I've been just thinking about like what's a good way of talking about this, but it's sort of the line of determinism, if that makes sense. It's like at what point are we getting from inference, and I'm not saying guessing, but like predicting the next best word, to something where there is a predictable, determined outcome, and at what point do we have that handover? And I spent the last week building a vibe coding setup on GCP, which was a ton of fun. And I tested two different approaches. So one is like I had the system generate Terraform code, which was an absolute disaster because completely outside terrible vulnerabilities, and I spent ages trying to go through this or design policy agents that would catch errors. It didn't work at all. And then I said, well, okay, let's let's just build a sort of a backend API so the systems, the LLMs can only pick from a very distinct, determined set of resource capabilities, and I essentially pulled the line of determinism forward. So the inference only had to pick something from a catalog, and then determined system take over. Yesterday or the day before, we saw the introduction of the Stripe payment model for ChatGPT, right? Also a line of determinism where ChatGPT says, like, I cannot sort of cross that line. I won't go to 1,500 MasterCard providers and try to do the payment. I'll call Stripe. What does that mean? Like, Bojan, maybe if you like, how do you think about, like, how far are you letting the AI actually go, and what does that mean to the never-ending conversation of how abstract platforms and systems should be built to deal with that freedom to security standardization trade-off?
I think it's a fine balance, right? I'm not sure I have a silver bullet answer here. We are constantly working on finding the right mode between, let's put it, randomness and determinism. Again, I think when it comes to engineering, that it's a bit easier, just because of how coding is and how well large language models work with that kind of data. Once you layer down your standards, once you layer down, again, the way and reduce the amount of noise and randomness, then the outputs tend to be pretty good. And there we are on the level of, hey, this is how our design system look like. Those are the components that we use. This is how we initialize the components. There are 5,000 ways or 50,000 ways to do this. 2-3 different objects on top of each other, but in our world we use 3, right? And those are the 3 ways, and then, or the 5 ways, whatever. And then the LLMs are actually pretty good to pick the right thing, especially as they're looking at designs and trying to match that in reality. This looks, in terms of end-to-end flows, pretty good. But something else is happening as well. I think we talk a lot and have been talking a lot about platform engineering being a keyword. I think platforms for business is what's coming up right now. At least we are heavily working on that. The new wave, let's call them the new wave workflow engines, coupled with agentic workflows on top. That's lethal combination. This grounds the models in the sense of, in a big business flow, I don't know, take those Excel files from this OneDrive folder, pass them to this LLM with those prompts. This is the kind of input you are getting. This is the kind of output that you instruct the LLM, I don't know, JSON, whatever, to produce out of it. And those are the next steps in the flow. This seems to be working pretty good, to the point where we see a lot of business user self-service. And I think this is one of the biggest capability unlocking paradigms that I see at the moment, which in the upcoming months and years, I think would really benefit a lot of companies out there, because everybody is extremely busy with a gazillion amount of stuff. Regardless of who you are and how big your technology team is, you can only cover a portion of this, usually more towards your customer-facing, value-creating use cases, or maybe some of your core business flows internally. But by far, you cannot capture all the value and all the challenges that your teams have internally to deal with your larger business. And by allowing and giving those self-service capabilities, very similarly to what we did years ago to engineers, or have been doing, I think this is going to be the biggest game changer that comes out of this. And coming back to your point, there, I think you can reach a pretty good level of determinism, definitely good enough for business teams to be putting their own automations, either to improve the work of their team, or in some cases, I think it's not too far off to put complete end-to-end processes out there that they are running revenue, running costs, etc. And still, foundation work needs to be done.
Yeah, but does that mean that like your platform engineering team is essentially now also serving more citizen developers in comparison to like as a new user group in addition to your standard user profile?
100%. What we did a couple of months ago is we allowed business teams to start building their lightweight agents, which is like, I don't know, think of it like the GBT in ChatGPT, whatever. Basically prompts with some actions, maybe some MCP tools behind the scenes, knowledge-based integrations, things like this, right? And maybe small permutations or code interpreters, etc. Still pretty lightweight. And then what happened was suddenly a couple of weeks later, emails start rolling. Hey, we are doing this thing, our team, and now we want to automate the whole thing. Right now, it's not. Right now, it's still human in the loop for the inputs, for triggering it, or maybe for scheduling some of those tasks. Now we want it all automated from the source till the end, right? There is this external partner we're working on, and we want the whole thing to go to them, right? In the past, that would be engineering team's job, right? To pick up that stuff and create those automations for them. And now we are like, hey, let's pause all of that because there are too many of those requests going in all different directions. Let's build a platform that allows people to basically, or integrate in that context, a end-to-end experience which allows people to self-serve, still, of course, bound to the same security standards and the same platform standards that we have our own applications. And they just speak about telemetry, you speak about auth, you speak about governance, you have it all, right? But it's actually pretty close. It's not far away.
And this is such a fascinating topic because I've been, I'm working on a sort of bigger set of content pieces, and if you just look at everything from Fordism, Taylorism over, lean, agile, everything. Like my number one prediction is we will see platform engineering going into so many different fields. Like it's always starting in IT, and it will go into so many different things. And as we're in sort of the factorization of knowledge work, that's really what it feels like. You'll see platform engineering for HR workflows. You'll see this for government workflows. Like platform engineering, like I have the sort of the very distinct gut feeling is going very far. Sorry, Ricky.
One interesting thing to have because the conversation that you're having that Boyan just described, we're having it internally at Thoughtworks as well about how do we kind of create these platform abstractions and democratize the ability to kind of create some of these workflows. And it's interesting because James, it was maybe about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, I think we both came to the conclusion that the platform abstraction or the communication tool for these types of building blocks already exists. And we've been using it for a really long time. BDD, behavior driven development, where people were like, oh, I'm going to create this specification and we're going to have all of these specifications to be able to describe these things. And James said, isn't that just BDD? You're just describing the behaviors that a system has, and that now you're giving those behaviors to an LLM, and then it just spits all of these things out. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. The platform abstraction that we want to build into the platform and expose to whoever, product, business, traditional engineers, is you tell me what you want the system to do in a consistent way, and we'll use the LLMs to generate 50-60% of that code. So you're now only developing the edges. So I think the more these things change and the more that we introduce a lot of the AI elements, the more that things kind of circle back to, oh, we were already doing that. We were already describing with high fidelity models how we want to build these systems. We just have to kind of like layer on some of the AI goodness and create the right platform abstraction so that developers and business folks can actually utilize them. I thought that was an interesting conversation because we're exploring that at ThoughtWorks is, well, how do we, if we want to go build a mortgage lending system for a client, we built 30 years of mortgage lending systems. How do we actually take that contextual knowledge and create something specification, a set of behaviors, so that we can quickly kind of create some of those things in a consistent way. I thought the conversation that you and Boyan were having was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll take one word out of that, which is I don't think I use the word just, because as an industry, we've really struggled to do things like BDD.
Yes,
Right,
that is true.
like the just bit is like we've I've spent my entire career saying like, hey, I learned this in terms of doing like correct requirements, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't do that here. So even just because we know what to do doesn't mean that we're able to execute it effectively, right, in this scenario.
Exactly.
So a
Yep.
lot of these techniques, whether it be BDD, TDD, DDD, like there's all sorts of these architectural techniques. Getting from the ivory tower, and I appreciate how abstract some of these things feel, into practical engineering is something that isn't new, but we've really struggled, and we're going to continue to struggle. And I think the bit that we're trying to get across here from our research is there's no silver bullet to this. You'll still have to do some of it. The models will not do this for you. They're not able to do that. And if they were, you would not let them. And I have this conversation with a lot of SREs. It's very normal that systems at scale are inherently non-deterministic. And that's very frustrating, I think, for people outside the industry. They're like, why would you do that? Why would you build a large system that like isn't deterministic? Like just write good code. What's wrong with you? The problem is inherent. Like complex adaptive systems occur at scale. We started with IAC and deterministic behaviors, but as they grow, the emergent behavior of complex adaptive systems exists. And so we actually already have techniques for how to manage CAS systems. We already know how to do some of these things. We're just really bad at it as humans, right? It's not been long in our journey as humans. It's not been a long, construction has been around for thousands of years, right? And so they have all these skills as real engineers, right? For software engineers, we're still learning, right? We're still new in our journey for those. But I think the message we want to get to people is like, you have some of those tools in your toolbox. They will apply for AI usage. You can turn non-deterministic things into deterministic things. And the mechanism we do for doing that, platforms. Right, that's why we do platforms, is broadly to turn these non-deterministic things into deterministic things. And Leah and I talk about this all the time, right? It's such a common. This is all from Dijkstra, like just do it in natural language. All right, how do I turn that into a controlled environment?
Let's shift down. I wanted to as a product leader, I've been doing product for platforms for quite a while. Like Ricky, something you said just kept jumping out at me, and you were talking about the platform abstractions, but I think I've actually come to think of it from a product perspective. We like to talk about platform as a product, but the key insight is that the platform is an abstraction, and to think of the platform as or the intended design goal as abstraction that then gets used in different ways for different purposes. But I don't know, it's really struck me as we've been working on this shift down and the line of determinism. It's like that when we look there, to your point, Casper, it is actually really interesting and productive to start just embracing this idea, or trying on this idea for size, let's say, that the platform is an abstraction. It's our biggest abstraction that we deal with in software engineering.
100%. I'm unfortunately, we're already again coming to these to the end. These conversations are always way too short. I just also I think that the message that we have to send is this message of just because there's a new technology, it doesn't mean that things change tomorrow. Like if you look at the history of innovation, you look at the steam engine, right? I think that's invented somewhere 1780s. And then you have this technical, this arc of technical innovation. You have steam engine and updates to the steam engine, and you have electricity coming along, etc. But it doesn't mean that at the advent of the steam engine, you had productive factories and hardware designs. Why? Because it takes an enormous amount of time during which humans really innovate from an organizational perspective, right? And so you go through all of these things. It takes 210 years until Ford then creates the factory, right? And between those things, you had technical innovation, you have organizational innovation. Now, the CPU is probably similar to the steam engine. The GPU is maybe an update to the CPU. And between, CPU, we come up with a CPU, and now we have this insane amount of iterations. We have lean and agile and safe and all of these things. And that's just normal because we're all learning on how to optimally fit that against a group of humans working together. And we'll see the same thing with AI over the next, probably condensed timelines, but we'll see this over the next years, and we're just not yet there yet. But I can just, like, from everything, I'm observing at the moment, this idea that you just said, Leah, of treating your platform as a product and thinking about this as an abstract thing to bring structure and design the integration between, and James, you said that at some meeting in New York that we all, as the traveling circus, went to a couple of years ago. It's a socio-technical problem. And for me, platform engineering is at the moment just the best bet on optimally integrating tech and social by thinking about this from a product perspective. I would have loved to, now be sitting in a bar with all of you in New York and everybody who's listening today, and then continuing making these things. That's unfortunately not possible. So thank you so much, everybody, for debating and listening and contributing. And let's take that offline and continue, researching, building great technology, and iterating through organizational design. I'm sure we'll spend the next decades doing this. Thank you so much, everybody, for contributing.